Welcome to Living a Graceful Life. I'm Denise Medved, your host, and I'm also the creator and founder of the Ageless Grace Brain Health Program worldwide, which is being taught and shared in retirement communities, nursing homes, assisted living, skilled nursing care all over the globe in 50 US states and 30 countries. I'm here to remind you on this show that it's never too late to begin making choices to create the life that you want to live. So wherever you are listening tonight, listening, watching, I hope that you know that regardless of your age, regardless of your situation, regardless of where you work, what you do, who your children are, who your grandchildren are, what you do for a living, you can always make choices to improve not only the quality of your life, but the quantity of your life, a sharper brain, a healthier body, a well-being that is not only skin deep, but that also feeds your soul and nourishes your heart. So I want to be honest and tell you that I had another show planned tonight. I was going to play a recording, and as it turned out, I was unable to do that. I couldn't get it to work. You'll get to see that at a future date. But what I came up with was something that is meant to be. I always think that when one door closes, a window opens, and the window that opened tonight was this vest. Fascinating. You might think, what about this vest? So I'm going to zoom back a little bit to let you get the full effect of this vest. It's covered with pins, brooches, buttons, and they all came from people I love. I call this my 4th of July vest because it has lots of stars and it has lots of fireworky things, sparkles. It has lots of American flags because in the United States, this is the 4th of July, the day that we celebrate our freedom, our independence. And so I think that I'm going to talk tonight about how these brooches and pins and stick items on this vest came about and how they are the grace of freedom and family and friends in my life. So first of all, one of the ones that you can see right away here is a little watch. It's the face of a watch that was given to me by my grandma, my dad's mom, and it was her watch. And she immigrated here right before World War I with my grandfather and my dad's older siblings. And my dad was born here in the United States, but he didn't get to learn to speak English until he was 7 years old. So they are from Eastern Europe. And that's the first thing that I grew up with when I think about the 4th of July, the ideal that there are people, many people in the world, not just my ma and pa, which is what I called my grandparents, who are willing to leave everything they have behind, who are willing to walk away from the textile mills that my grandfather had, to take a long journey across an ocean and to come to a completely different continent and a different country in the hope of having a better life, not only for themselves, but for their children. My dad had 2 older brothers and an older sister, and they wanted to make a better life for their family, where there was no fear, where there was freedom to walk the streets, to get the job you wanted, to go to the college that you might want to sing, to dance, to play in a way that you wanted to. And so that's one of the most important pieces on this vest that I celebrate all the time not just the 4th of July. Now, another thing that's on this vest is this little American flag. I don't know if you can see that it has sparkles in it. Those are all made of rhinestones. My mom wore this every 4th of July and every patriotic holiday, including on the day that she voted. And from an early age, my mom, who inspired Ageless Grace after her diagnosis of Alzheimer's, would tell me how lucky I was to live in a country where I had choices. Now, my parents were of a certain political party, but my mom, when I got to be about 19, 20, took me to meet a friend of hers who was from the opposite political party. And she said, I don't want you to do anything just because your parents did it. You have a good mind, and I want you to make the choices that are right for you. So I literally spent an afternoon with a woman. I'm getting teary because I'm talking about people I love who aren't with me anymore. Not here on this earth anyway. They're in my heart and they're all around me. So I literally spent an entire afternoon talking, asking questions with a woman who was chairman of the opposite political party in our area where I grew up in Tennessee. And so this always reminds me of how important it is to not impose your thoughts, your beliefs, your mores on, to stand by them for yourself, to uphold them, to be proud of them, and to allow others to make their own decisions, just like my mom did me. Now, right here is another American flag. This was my daddy's. My dad, as I said already, learned to speak English when he was 7. He had great pride in our country. He was not only proud of his country, not only proud of our freedoms, but he fought in World War II. He was in the 10th Armored Division of Patton's 3rd Army. And most of you know the stories of Patton's Army and the brave and courageous things they did for our country and for other countries who were involved in World War II. One of the greatest memories I have of my dad, and I have many, is when it was the anniversary, I think it was the 50th anniversary. Yeah, that's right. Of the 10th Armored Division's 3rd Army reunion. And it was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where my grandparents and my dad's family immigrated from Eastern Europe. I went to Milwaukee many, many times to visit, and it was very different from where I grew up in Raccoon Valley, Tennessee. I found it fascinating because people spoke many different languages. There were many different colors of skin. There were many different countries represented just on the block or two where my grandparents lived. So this reunion was in Milwaukee in the late 90s, as would have been the 50th reunion from the World War II, 10th Armored Division. And my dad got an invitation to go, of course. He taught hand-to-hand combat and was an MP and trained in jujitsu and a number of other types of things. And I said, Dad, how exciting, you're going to this. And he said, oh no, I'm not going to go. And I wondered why. And he said, I don't like to fly. You know, I don't like to fly. And he said, it's such a long way. It's too far to drive. So I was determined that my dad was going to go to this reunion, not only for the reunion, but also for the city in which he grew up, where he had not visited in many years since his parents, my grandma and grandpa, had passed away. So I flew from California, where I was living, to Tennessee. And I said to my dad, pack your bag, get in the car. I'm driving you to Milwaukee. And it was one of the greatest times I've ever had. My mom went also, and my husband. And it was fabulous. There were so many reminiscences. There was such a great sharing among the men and women who had been in World War II together, who had served literally in the trenches, who had lost people that they worked side by side with every day, who had somehow managed to come home, some of them wounded, some of them not. And they had this great camaraderie, even though they may have only known each other for a short while in the scheme of a lifetime. They were hugging, they were sharing stories, they were laughing. Sometimes they were sad as they remembered one of their good friends who had fallen. And their wives were sharing stories about how they were in the wax or the waves, or how they wrote letters every day from home. And my mom worked in an airplane factory. I always kid around and say she was Rosie the Riveter. No kidding. We have photos of her with her hair tied up and her shirt tied up and wide pants, which was a little bit shocking at that time. And because she worked on an assembly line, and she did write my dad every day as she put those airplanes together during World War II. So I saw my dad light up with joy and pleasure and shed a few tears with sadness during that reunion. And one of the most fun things that happened was all of his friends kept coming over to me because they would say, we want to meet his daughter. You were just a twinkle in his eye at the time that we knew him. So there was a band there. It was Les Brown and his band of renown. And we danced music from the 1940s. It was powerful. It was magical. It was beautiful. It was like stepping back in time. Many of the men who could still fit into them wore their uniforms. My dad was trim as always. And they called each man up one by one. There were a lot of men there. Each person up one by one, called them by name, and the commanding officer saluted them. And it was quite moving to see all that. And it was quite fun to dance with all those men. Such a good time I had. They kept calling me a youngster, which was pretty fun also. So that makes me think, those buttons from my mom and my dad makes me think of how not only do I appreciate my freedoms, not only do I appreciate my ability to choose what party or no party that I'm a part of, but also I also appreciate the fact that my dad fought for my freedoms, and that my grandmother and grandfather risked everything to come here to the United States for the hopes and dreams of a better life. Now, my other grandmother, I never knew my other grandfather, my dad, my mom's dad. He passed away right before I was born, actually. But I do have some things on here from my other grandmother. I also, by the way, I just noticed this. This is the pin of my dad's 10th Armored Division in the 3rd Army that I have on here. So this cross was my grandmother's and my mom's. They were of the Christian faith. And my grandmother and my grandfather, before I was born, had a lot of land. They had 800 and something acres, and they deeded 25 acres to found a church because there was no church in Raccoon Valley. And they became founding members of this church, which is the church where my mom played the piano for 63 years. no kidding, and where my dad sang as a soloist, even though he had been raised in another faith. And I went to that church from before I was born. I was in my mom's belly while she played the piano. And I knew every person in that church. I still know just about every person in that church. It was a community, it was a gathering of not only faith, but also of community and of friendship and of neighborhood, which is another blessing that we have to be thankful for. The gift of community, the gift of being in partnership with other people, maybe the ones who live next door, maybe the ones who live across the street, maybe the ones who are our town. Maybe it's a community, a faith-based church. Maybe it's a community of an organization that you belong to, or a school that you go to or used to go to. But that is a privilege that we have to be thankful for on this day also. The privilege of choosing friends, the privilege of making friends, the privilege of being a friend. And so my grandmother and my grandfather knew how to do that beautifully. They not only gave land to the church, but they gave so much to that community. It was before this phrase was even coined, but my grandparents were civil rights activists. My grandmother, who was way ahead of her time, had her own general store. It was hers. My grandfather was a foreman on the Southern Railway, but he also was a gentleman farmer. And he had tenant farmers who, after they worked and shared crops with him and my family for years, they would get the land in return for working the land. So now all those 800 acres are split up into many, many farms and many, many families. And now the third and fourth generations live where my grandfather started the idea of tenant farmers in our community. So every day, early in the morning, my grandmother would make breakfast for all the workers on the farm, especially during harvest time, but also during planting time. And my grandfather hired men who needed it most, whatever color their skin was, wherever they were from, whatever their level of education. And he invited them all into my grandparents' home for breakfast around the table. Many of them would say, "Oh, no, sir, I should not come into your home because I have a different color skin." And my grandfather would say, "We're all neighbors around my table." And my grandmother's store, she had signs that said, "Everyone will be served in the order in which they come into this store." So regardless of the color of your skin, when you walked in that door, if you were next in line, regardless of who walked in right after you, you were and waited upon with equal attention and care as anyone else in the store, again, regardless of your station, regardless of the color of your skin. And my grandmother told me there were many people who walked out of that store and said they were not going to come back. And she said, "That's just fine. That's your choice." So we're back to choices again. My grandparents, my mother's mom and dad, had choices as well. Their families have been here in America since 1772. So I have two complete different backgrounds. I have the family that got here and my dad learned to speak English when he was 7, and I have the family that got here in 1772. And their choices were to treat everyone equally. I was taught that at my grandmother's knee. She always said to me, "Everyone in this community, everyone in this state, everyone in this nation is equal. And don't you ever think they're not." My grandmother would make clothes. She was a seamstress and a tailor. So was my other grandmother, by the way. I always had nice clothes because both grandmothers could really sew well. And my grandmother uh, in Tennessee could also quilt. She could crochet. She could knit. It was amazing. Some of my fondest memories were putting my arms around her shoulders while she sat at her sewing machine, and I'd lean over her shoulder and watch her hands as she sewed. Or I do the same thing over her quilting frame, which I always set up, and she was always quilting with the pieces that were left over from whatever it was she had been sewing, usually dresses for herself, myself, my mom's sister, and her daughter. We had a lot of girls in our family, so my granny made a lot of dresses. And I can remember she never once said to me, "Don't hang on my neck, don't lean over me." She always answered my questions. She always enjoyed, or pretended like she enjoyed, having me hanging over her neck while she sewed. And so I watched my granny's hands, and I always think of her beautiful hands, the way they cooked, the way they served people in the store, the way they made breakfast for workers of all colors and ages and abilities and education levels. And I remember her hands because I have her hands. Every time I look down at my own hands, I say, those are my granny's hands. I know because I watched those hands every day for years and years as I grew up. So what else is on this vest? This belonged to my ma when she came here from Eastern Europe. It's garnets. And it was hers, and it's one of the treasures that I have that belonged to her. This is a lady's pocket watch, and it belonged to one of my chosen mothers. Her name was Mary, and she lived in California when my husband Roger and I lived there. And she was a friend of Roger's first, and she was magical. She worked in a toy store. Of course, she worked in a toy store. And the name of the toy store was Geppetto's. Of course, it was named Geppetto's. And she loved toys and play and children and teddy bears and Christmas trees. So we adopted Mary. I had lost my mom, and we adopted Mary, and she became our mom. And we had her at our house for Mother's Day and Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter and every holiday we could possibly celebrate, probably the 4th of July picnic as well. And so Mary loved, we had bears all over our house too, by the way. I still do. I have a bedroom in my house that's just full of bears because it's my grandkids stay there a lot. And I just filled it full of bears and a few other things like lambs and white squirrels, and all of them are plush toys. And so Mary had us come one day to Geppetto's, and she had me pick out the perfect teddy bear for me, and she had Roger pick out the perfect teddy bear for Roger. We still have them. They're upstairs in our bedroom. His teddy bear is named Spanky, and my teddy bear is named Oatmeal. And the other thing she did was every year she lived in a big old Victorian home in Pacific Grove, and she would fill every room with Christmas trees, and every Christmas tree had a different theme. One was all bears, one was all birds, one was all gold, one was all bluebirds, one was all sorts of kitchen utensils and things like that. She was so clever. And every one of the rooms, I think she probably had like about 6 or 7 bedrooms, but every room had at least one tree. Some of them had more. And she would open the house up every year to strangers. She would just open them up to anyone and say, come and enjoy this holiday with me. And you don't have to be a person who celebrates Christmas to enjoy the beauty of all the trees that I have here. And so Mary was open-hearted, giving. She was of service all the time to the community, And she gave me this lady's watch as a gift. It had been, she told me it had been her aunt's, and now it's mine. And what I have on it is kind of special too, because it has a watch fob. It's just 3 hearts. And it is the wedding ring shaped into a heart of my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my mother and dad. And so that's a precious piece, and it goes in the pocket watch right here on a chain of this memory 4th of July jacket. So I could go on and on. There are a lot more brooches and pins on here that I haven't talked about yet, but maybe we'll save that for another time and another show, because I'd like to tell you right now a little bit about how I was inspired by all of these people to create the Ageless Grace Brain Health Program. You can learn more about it at agelessgrace.com, and you'll find all kinds of things on there. There is a free class that you can get, so you can experience it. It is a movement program that is designed to activate the 5 primary functions of your brain. And that's my gift of service to the world. It was my freedom to be able to experiment, to create, to market, to do pilot programs, to create this gift that was inspired by my mother, as I said earlier, after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And it's real. It became real. Like I said at the beginning, it's also in 50 US states. It's being taught to children as well as to adults, because everybody has a brain, and it does stimulate the 5 primary functions of the brain with each movement that we make. So I tested the program for 7 years and did research on the program, and then it was launched. And it was launched 11 years ago after 7 years of research. So on that website, agelessgrace.com, you'll also find all kinds of testimonials and videotapes, and me and others talking about the impact that Ageless Grace has had on so many lives. And I don't like to take credit for it myself. I really like to give credit to both my mom and my dad. My dad was physically active, and he was doing gymnastics up until a month or 2 before he passed away from cancer, and sharp as a tack. And my mom, who did not like to exercise or move, but loved to read and study, she was a brainiac, was the one who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And it was that juxtaposition of seeing one parent be so sharp and healthy and was very physically active, and the other parent who was very mentally active. And we were being told at the time that if you did crossword puzzles and word games, that your brain would stay sharp. It was that juxtaposition that made me say, wait a minute, something's not accurate here. It can't be true. And of course, now they have proven, they meaning places like Harvard Medical School and Yale and Mayo Clinic, and many, many others, thousands of others, have proven that word games, crossword puzzles, card games do not delay cognitive decline, because they only affect 1 or 2 of the functions of the brain. And I like to compare it to brushing your teeth. If you just brush the front of your teeth only, eventually you're going to have tooth decay and bad teeth all in the rest of your mouth. And that's the same way with the brain. If you're exercising 1 or 2 parts of it, or 1 or 2 functions of it, the entire brain can still have cognitive decline. So you need to address strategic planning, memory and recall, analytical thinking, creativity and imagination, and kinesthetic learning. And when we do our Ageless Grace program, we are activating those 5 functions, as well as physical skills of the body that we need to stay optimally functional the rest of our lives. We're also have our products and information on winwinwomen.com, WINWIN women.com, and you can find us there as well. So thank you so much for joining me for living a graceful life, and especially for talking about the vest on this 4th of July. Thanks for being here.